Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we are changing the mental health narrative, bringing hope and solutions. Here's your host, Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist.
Larry Thompson is a social worker who was trained at New York University. Larry incorporates his training in dialectical behavioral therapy and cognitive analytic therapy with nature and holistic approaches in work with adolescents, individuals, and families. Larry's passion for integrating a total wellness approach continues to carry over into his professional and personal life. He has completed a postgraduate certificate through Drexel in complementary and integrative therapies, so as to offer his clients additional options for their wellness recovery, as well as iRest yoga, nidra meditation through the Integrative Restoration Institute. Larry, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for inviting me. This is such an honor.
I'm excited to hear more about yourself and your practice. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the work you do and what drives your passion for it?
When I sit across people and they ask me that question, the joke always is, I'm a therapist for a reason. If you looked at my ACE scores, I'm probably a 7 out of 10. My invitation, the calling for therapy started very young, and having been exposed to therapy throughout my childhood and adolescence, through all the mud, like Thich Nhat Hanh, one of my favorite teachers, talks about no mud, no lotus flower.
Right.
And so there's been a bunch of mud. There's been a bunch of mud in my life, right? So growing up in a domestically violent home, a home of mental illness, a home of addiction, a home of poverty, a home of instability, right? Type 1, type 2 trauma. Trauma is the gateway drug. So from that exposure, the graces in my life, being exposed to therapy, one of the few things that my parents were able to kind of step outside themselves to provide was some therapy, some exposure to therapy that got this idea, this taste in my mouth that maybe there's some way of relating to what's going on for me that could be helpful. That first exposure. And in my mom's own working through sobriety, she brought us to Alateen back then. I'm not even sure if Alateen's still around per se, but when my mother was in recovery, when I was 9, 10 years old, even that experience of fellowship, that there could be a family, there could be safety outside my home that might be able to sanction me into something else that I was experiencing. That and this really weird going through the terror that I experienced, there was always a voice back here whispering to me saying, this all has to mean something. This all has to be for a reason, what I'm going through. I remember clearly having that awareness at 13 years old. And I think those two forces, or those multiple forces, made this profession, this idea of this profession possible. And then in my own recovery, I got into AA. At 15, 16 years old. Back then, young people were a novelty. So when I came in after almost dying from aspirating when I was blackout drunk, at 15, 16, I came into AA having that seed planted in my childhood. And I was well held by this fellowship of people, right? So that also played a major part in this idea of getting the profession. So going through early recovery throughout my adolescence, I came to a decision at the graduation of high school. And either I was going to play NFL football because football had become another holding, supporting, affirming force in my life, or I was going to be a therapist. And so we kind of see how that worked out.
Yep.
I played Division III football at Montclair State. I majored in football. I barely got through. 5-year plan, got through it. Tried out for the Jets and Giants, and so here I am. And not regretting it because I can still run around with my little children and not lose my hip or my knee along the way. So that worked out, I think, hopefully for the better. The passion is gratitude. I think the passion is wanting to be of service. The passion is wanting to make suffering meaningful. Like, what am I going to do with this? We talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the idea of higher levels of service as you hopefully get more integrated and healthy. And it was kind of organic, just knowing that all this had to be purposeful in some reason. The legacy of all that trauma, wanting to do something with it of service, because so much was given to me along the way. AA, the fellowship, the therapists I've worked with. One of my favorite teachers is Tim Olmsted, who's Pema Chodron's kind of co-teacher. And Tim has this wonderful way of saying this from his teacher, actually, which is that we are all a collection of the kindnesses of others. And like, that is so true in my life, right? And so feeling an obligation almost to do something with that legacy of kindness that's been given to me, right? And so wanting to do something with it and to make a difference, to do something that's going to tell those people that have traveled those places I've traveled that you're not alone and that there's a way out of hell. And it's here when you're ready, as you're ready, if you're ready. And then after Montclair and getting into the field, I pursued my master's at Rutgers and NYU because another very important person in my life, Catherine, she was my fiance at the time. After graduating Montclair, I went to work in a psych hospital as an MHA. It doesn't pay very well. And so I started selling high-end fitness equipment. And I looked the part. And so I was really good at selling high-end fitness equipment to the affluent people in New Jersey and in New York. But it wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't meaningful, but it was profitable. And this is where like capitalism almost got me, Tim. Capitalism almost got me. So I'm working part-time in a psych hospital with adolescents in crisis and full-time selling really expensive equipment. And the woman in my time, my life, Catherine, who became my wife and the mother of my first child, said, Larry, I asked her, I said, Catherine, should I pursue my master's? Because there's a lot of good money in sales. And she said, Larry, you've got to follow your dream because someday your son might ask if he should follow his and you want to say yes. And so love sanctioned me into this profession as well. And so she ended up paying for my master's because she had a much better job than me. And I graduated NYU holding my firstborn son, who's actually with me today. He came to visit from Florida. So I graduated NYU and developed this relationship with mindfulness meditation through my first exposure with Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Peace Every Step. I first read that book even prior to meeting Catherine when I was 25, and it cracked open my head. A lot of it was familiar from AA, and a lot of it was mindfulness and being present was kind of familiar, but then it's expanded.
Right. And
so I found myself organically incorporating mindfulness meditation in my work from the go. Like I opened my first private practice in 2001. And it's been the fabric of who I've been since then, right? The passion also is the privilege. I think it's a privilege. It is a privilege. It's an honor to sit across someone doing the hardest thing possible. They come into the office terrified and anxious and suffering so much. Thich Nhat Hanh says that misunderstanding is a source of all suffering. Misunderstanding is a source of all suffering. And I've never found that to be inaccurate. So for someone to come into the office terrified, not understanding their own experience, and they come in and they sit across from you, and it's a privilege. I'm a very big white male, right? I am 6'1", 285 pounds. I have women coming in who've been brutalized, inviting me in to sit with them, right? It makes no sense to me. Psychology says, social learning theory is if relationships have been so painful, why would someone come into a therapeutic relationship thinking it would not be? And Richard Schwartz was the first psychologist that I heard really speak to that process that I had witnessed so often. Why would this person come in to talk to a therapist, my size, my complexion, and talk about how men had brutalized them? Like, why would they think another relationship would work when relationships have been so painful? And Richard Schwartz says there's a place inside of us that belongs to us, that's untouched by trauma, and always seeks delight. He articulated that experience that I had been experiencing long before I got exposed to internal family systems. But that's what makes sense to me. The passion is the privilege and the honor of being in that journey together. Because it's made me a better person. It's made me a better father, a better husband, a better man. It's a relationship. It's reciprocity, this journey, right? That's what fuels it. 30 years into this profession, and yeah, I'm here. I'm all about it. It's not labor. It's not work to me. It's out loud meditation. If I was to coin Jonathan Faust's, Tara Brock's husband, he taught me that word a long time ago. Out loud meditation. When you come into therapy, it's just out loud meditation. And what arises is supposed to rise, and we just kind of honor it and get curious about it and try to make sense of it. I believe therapy is trying to bring what's misunderstanding into the world of understanding. Right? It's not a thing that bothers you that gets you. It's not understanding the thing that bothers you that really drives you into deep suffering. Because once you understand it, you can figure out what to do with it. Right? So whatever technique we do, whatever process we're processing, like that's really the work. How do we understand this with curiosity and compassion? How do we understand this thing so you can relate to it in a way that is just more functional, more effective, more healing, and more healthy in your life, right?
So it sounds like the work you've done has led you to a rather non-pathologizing model over time.
Well, one of the core messages, the four unlimited attitudes of Eastern philosophy, right? Joy, compassion, loving kindness, and equanimity, that we're equals here, that we're both deserving of light and love, and our personhoods are not disequal, right? So therapists come from behind the desk, sit across from another human being and saying, I'm just a human being too. Yes, you come, client, with your reality, with your experience, with your story and your expertise, your wisdom. And I come with my training and my life experience and my reality. And maybe together something happens. Maybe together, if we share that reality in the same size. Dr. George Outwood, retired professor at Rutgers, wrote a lot in the phenomenological approach of intersubjectivity with Stolroy and others. He's actually the mentor of my mentor, and my mentor is Carol Davis. And so she actually worked a lot with George. George has this rule I love so much. It's so beautiful. It's the rule of the R's, the rule of the letter R, the rule of reality. So you have your reality, my friend. I have my reality. Whose reality should be more important, right? Should my reality be more important because I have all these years and diplomas and post-grad certs? Well, if that's the case, then I become a narcissistic jerk that doesn't live in your world and has really no application maybe in your world. But if I just become a yes man, if the client's reality is the only thing that's important, then I have nothing to offer. Then there's no place in. So that pathologizing kind of idea is saying, hey, let's listen to the story together and share our realities to create maybe a more expansive one. And we leave the world feeling more connected, less alone, and more understood, hopefully. Right? So that's also been a foundational principle in everything that I've touched along the way. And it has probably roots in my early recovery too. AA. You get a bunch of drunks together. We're all messed up. We all recognize that. No one's greater or lesser. And so very much so in my life. Because I'm like, and now, you hear it all the time. Judith Herman's work on trauma recovery, that healing happens in relationship, right? How do we create that relationship that's going to really, how do we create a relationship that really brings a person back to themselves with compassion, right? Isn't that the focus of our work, right? Can we create a relationship that becomes a bridge or doorway, a passageway back to a person falling back in love with themselves, right? When I work with new clients, which I don't have a chance to as much anymore, besides running integrated care concepts and other projects, I still carry about a caseload of 15 to 17 clients a week. I didn't build a business to not be a therapist, though I probably should be doing that. But I have And I had no other choice. It's kind of who I am, right? So when I first meet a client, I say to him, imagine you were hanging out at Starbucks down the street here, and Larry Thompson walked in. And by some Twilight Zone, science fiction movie-ish, another Larry Thompson walks in right behind him. If I were to greet myself at Starbucks and you were watching that, how would you think that transaction would go? Would I come up to myself and give myself a big hug? Or would I look at myself and walk out disgusted? And I say, therapy's whole job, if you boil down what we're doing here in my profession, it's right there and then. It's if Larry Thompson is good with Larry Thompson, no matter where Larry Thompson goes, it's going to be okay, because you filter your life through your self-relationship. If I'm not good with Larry Thompson, you can drop me into any paradise in the world, and it wouldn't register. So our job, I believe strongly in our profession, is to help people create that healthier, integrated relationship with themselves, so that where they go, it's going to be okay, because they're okay. Right? And so that's a very long answer to the very direct question about the passion and purpose and non-pathologizing attitude. It's really reuniting and falling back in love, maybe for the first time ever with oneself.
Well, so you've mentioned things like ACEs, adverse childhood events, and you've mentioned trauma. And so I like to ask people, what are the models and or techniques that you find most useful in helping you help somebody who's got a lot of ACEs, adverse childhood events, or a lot of trauma in their life when they come to you for assistance?
So it's so important question. What arises in my awareness when I hear you ask that, the first thing that flashes is, trauma-informed care doesn't really start in the therapy room, right? Trauma-informed care starts at the phone call, right? If that person in my office who's answering that phone is not present, if that presence isn't communicated in the tone and quality of their voice, that person who is hyper-aroused or hypo-aroused, that person who is terrified, anxious, traumatized, never makes it to my waiting room. And then when they come to my waiting room, is the waiting room inviting? Is a physical environment soothing? Or are they coming into a very sterile, very imposing environment? So our waiting rooms are designed to be more like boutiques, with essential oils to look at and singing bowls and things of interest to give them a sense, their whole nervous system, a sense that this is safe or safer, or at least curious. And then that front desk person, what's that welcoming like? Are they really present too? Where they can say, hey, welcome, I see you, right? And then you come into my office, like what's the color palette in the office? And are the lights dimmable? And, are we asking how the temperature in the room is for the client? Subtly asking them to check in with their nervous system as they come in. Is the light okay? Is the temperature okay? Is the room okay? And then giving them a tour of the office, so they know where egress is, they know where access is, so they have a really good sense of where they're at, where they can find safety they need to, right? So all these little small touches set the table, for hopefully what's going to happen in the therapy office. And then they come in, we train our staff to do a very thorough introduction. So even before the work happens, if that client doesn't know who you are and how you operate, then how do they drop into the work, right? And then once you get into the work, there's a whole toolbox opens up, right? During that first one or two conversations, we start developing a sense of what tools may be most helpful, because it's not one size fits all. Every person's story is so unique. So yes, of course, the mind-body approach is essential, right? Marshall Linehan's work, I first got exposed to right out of college. And so DBT, that dialectical behavior therapy, that infusion of mindfulness and mind-body approaches into this cognitive relationship with their behaviors was again, fit right into my curiosity and early training into mindfulness. So it was a really good fit. So I'm always trying to help them start off with taking a breath, dropping in, getting an embodied presence going, so we can move from trauma brain functioning to more present learning brain functioning. Because if that client is up aroused from trauma, anxiety, then it's water on rock. Like, you might feel really good about what you're saying, You might feel really good about what you're saying, but it may not be able to penetrate, right? So what informs our practice, of course, polyvagal, Porges' work is so wonderful. Marshall Linehan's work, so wonderful. Amy Weintraub's work, Life Force Yoga, so wonderful. So understanding the mind and body have to show up together for the work to happen, right? And then we start customizing approaches, because depending on how a person journeys and how they care, how they've been carrying what they've been carrying, sometimes mindfulness meditation is not a good fit for that person. So we start giving tastes of things. So we're doing drop-ins and we're talking and we're noticing arousal states. And then we might pause in session to come back down to start again. And so this is an inherent exposure response approach to their own nervous system as they look upon what they've been carrying, hopefully in an environment of compassion. Right? So we have many offices here that are also yoga studios. We have a number of clinicians who are duly credentialed, having an LCSW or LPC credential and a yoga cert credential, right? So integrating care concepts is integrated mental health, right? So yes, we have 5 prescribers of medication, 4 psychiatrists and 1 APN. We have 65 therapists. But the joke is, Tim, is that we're the Baskin Robbins of therapy. We got a flavor for everybody. Sandtray, Art, Eco, Equine, DBT, CBT, all the T's, IFS, what flavor is going to be best for that client. And then we have 10 mind-body people who are either dual credentialed or credentialed in a mind-body discipline, right? Breath work, trauma-informed yoga, trauma-sensitive yoga, I-Rest Yoga Nidra, which is one of my favorite, Richard Miller's work in Integrative Restoration Yoga Nidra, which I love so much. Art, sand play, brain spotting, EMDR, tapping, right? So, the Buddha said, don't look at me as a way, I'm just a finger pointing to the moon, right? So the idea that there's so many different answers and so many different ways that has to be customized. Dr. Ron Siegel, the chair of Harvard School of Psychotherapy and Meditation, also a great author, talks about customizing mindfulness. What approach is going to work for that person? Because I really do believe, I try not to have too many attachments to concepts, but I do. Of course I do. I do believe mindfulness, developing a quality of mindfulness is really pivotal. It's very hard to learn Algebra 2 if your head's always on fire and you're always distracted, right? So how do we help people create a clearing the dense forest of their trauma, anxiety, depression, addiction, so that they can greet themselves to develop a new skill? So sometimes medication, I'm not a pill pusher. None of our psychiatrists are pill pushers, but we believe and we understand it's really hard to learn a new skill: mindfulness, de-stress tolerance, emotional regulation, interpersonal effectiveness. It's really hard to learn those skills if your brain's on fire. Really hard. And so sometimes medication is a bridge for skills to develop. But when skills develop, neuroplasticity, right? The brain structures change so that meds may no longer be needed. And so all our prescribers see medication as a bridge if and when necessary and not a destination. There's not one approach here. It's really about customizing approaches in this collaborative way, But to even drill down further, I think the key to trauma-informed care is the befriending or mitigating or addressing anxiety on both sides of that equation. When we train our staff, is a staff person, is the clinician really present? What might hijack them from being really present? Their anxiety of, can I handle what the client's coming in with? Can I handle, am I good enough? All the anxiety in the back, curtain of our profession. Don't look behind the curtain, right? So behind that curtain, inside that clinician can be a whole amusement park of ego threading and anxiety. So how do we help our staff at every level, the access person, the reception person, really feel present, really work with their anxiety in a way so they can be present? Because we appreciate anxiety and trauma is a barrier to attachment, right? If we understand that our profession is looking at helping people attach themselves through attaching to another first, we need to be mindful in trauma-informed approaches to address that barrier to attachment. And what's that barrier? if the clinician is freaked out, that could be a problem to that attachment. So how do we care for our staff? I think trauma-informed care has to start with trauma-informed approaches to your staff. Lawrence Schulman's work on interactional supervision in the parallel process. Are you caring for your staff so they can care for clients? And then thinking about, if I'm coming in with my child or my partner or myself, looking for help, I'm desperate, I'm anxious, I'm terrified, I'm confused. So I'm probably going to want to know about you before I let you know about me. Like, our profession is crazy. We ask people to come in at states of anxiety and trauma and tell us all your secrets. You don't know me. You don't know my approach. You don't know what's going on here. But tell me all about you, because I have some diploma on the wall. That's crazy. So we train our staff to make sure clients know us. I'm Larry Thompson. I talk fast. Slow me down if I talk too fast. I get passionate about what I say. My wife tells me I can talk to her chair and have a good conversation. So please help me make sure we talk about what you want to talk about. I spend 15, 20, 30 minutes the first session framing out what it means to work with me, so that they have a really good sense of who they're getting involved in. Informed consent. Are we informing that client about what they're consenting to when they work with us? Are we really doing that job, besides signing some piece of paper? So when you talk about non-pathologizing collaborative approach, it starts at the go, right? It starts at the phone call. It's not just in the clinical room. So yes, another very long answer to a very short question.
Is there a trick to slowing you down? Do you offer some tips to your clients to how to get you to slow down?
What I offer is check-ins, and what I offer is permission. What I find myself doing, because you know how it works, right? Once you identify that that's my vulnerability, awareness kind of shows up about that vulnerability, right? So what I find myself doing, and of course the first 2-3 sessions, the client, did Larry really give me permission to stop him? Is that really true? Because we still have that inherent power, right, in the session, right? So what I find myself doing to kind of invite more of that collaboration is, I'll pause. How does that land to you? Does that make sense to you? Am I still on the right track here? Am I lecturing? Please tell me. So I am trying to drop in with them about using that third ear in session, right? The ear listening to the client, the ear listening to you, and the ear listening to what's going on between you two, right? So speaking to that, observing energy is what I try to do to invite that in. But I try to give them that tool.
And the other thing is when you are really tuned into their autonomic responses, their physiology, their body language, their little eye raises, eyebrow raises, and nods, and breath patterns, and it can be the thing that you use to let you know that they don't believe they have permission to slow you down.
Rod Siegel, Dr. Siegel, talks about exactly what you're saying. How I am with you right now is not too dissimilar to how I am, right? But the first implication of the application of mindfulness in the clinical session is the practitioner's use of that, right? So as you're mentioning, being really present, to really be present with them and notice them and all the changes. Are they hyper aroused? And that thing that happens, right? Stephen Porges calls it neuroception, right? That part of your nervous system that's sensing in to the vibration of that moment, the energy in the room, the energy being created by you two, but also that embodied, intuitive, felt experience of the client is really with you and you're really with them. I cannot stress more how important that neuroceptive experience is. I think there's so much that's lost on the telehealth platform, that when you're in relation, the whole body, whole person relation is so important. And that neuroceptive cue for the therapist and the client, I think it's just, to my mind, irreplaceable, especially in trauma work, right? Because I do telehealth, and I will definitely provide that for clients that I've known for a while, who I can really understand how their vocal quality communicates their vagal nerve state, right? And they kind of use that as kind of biofeedback in some respect. Yeah, I don't get on my soapbox too much, but I just think that's that, as you mentioned, that really present, embodied, full experience. So you know where the client's at is just a clinician really, really employing mindfulness. I think just elevates all that awareness to make the moment more efficient and more effective.
Well, and one of the things you said that's critical is the therapist, the clinician, being mindful, not necessarily teaching mindfulness techniques to the person in front of them, but actually being mindful, applying those techniques and doing their own check-in, living in the question, as Rilke would say, right? Without demanding the answer, and staying open in that way is critical.
And the appropriate use of self-disclosure, right?
So that's a loaded, right? You're so right. And yet it's so loaded because if you don't have your own, your own clarity about your own issues and your own triggers, and then you don't even know what that means. Appropriate use. I read in a book once that it's okay to tell them that I tripped when I was in grade school and scraped my knee. So I'll throw that in, but that's where what you were talking about earlier about the supervision of the clinician is so important.
I love what you're saying. Just that the recognition arises in my awareness that our schools, our graduate schools, still teach our graduates effective use of self, and social work, effective use of self. And every intern and new therapist I supervise, they have no idea what the hell that means.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And so schools teach you therapy, but we teach you how to be a therapist, right? And so my use of self-disclosure is more about modeling. So just what happened in this transaction, you mentioned, use of self. So Tim, when I hear you say that, this thought arises in my awareness about, so I'm modeling what's arising, right? I'm not so much going into, my childhood trauma, but in the present moment, when you say that or look this way or not look this way, those things arising. It's arising. Going back to the phenomenological approach of George Atwood's work. And being able to disclose that so that I'm here with you. So the client knows I am really here with you, using all of my parts and pieces here to be of service, right? But that's not really trained in schools. Effective use of self. I go out, I'm going to be a therapist. Okay, I'm a therapist. Effective use of self. What does that mean? Right? And so, but you're right, it's loaded. It's definitely, I appreciate why schools may not necessarily go into it as much. I totally appreciate the sanction our profession has about self-disclosure because there's a nuance there. There's a vocational development that has to happen there as well too. Because like you said, if I don't know myself, my internal architecture, God knows what will come out of my mouth. And hence the practice of self-compassion and mindfulness. Very much so.
Well, I look at the clock and I realize we've only got maybe 10 minutes left if we stretch it. If you just settle in for a minute and think about, so you've talked about a lot of different things. Is there something that you've already talked about you want to go back and highlight, or some aspect of either you as a therapist or the primary work you do with clients that we haven't even touched on yet that you'd like to share with us?
I think what arises, and when I hear you ask that question, is the organization, our profession's more thoughtful application to how we care for our profession, our clients. Our clients' care is directly related to what? The clinicians' care. All Christian Neff's work about self-compassion. I mean, I can spend hours just talking about the importance of that and how that shows up in the clinical hour.
Whose work on
Christopher Neff?
Christopher Neff, okay.
Yeah. And I go and there's he's as a trailhead. There's so many people behind that as well. A frontline clinician is working at a community mental health center or a private practice. And they're being told by the administration, okay, Tim, I want you to be a loving, unconditional, positive regarded object that will use empathy as a change agent to support clients' recovery. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. There you are. But then what they don't say is do as we say, not as we do. Right? So many organizations that I grew up in, one of the missions of integrated care concepts is to learn from that suffering. Right? So many organizations, hospitals, not-for-profits, chew therapists up, impacts that collaborative relationship that's so important with their clients because there's no parallel process. Do as I say, not as I do, but we're not going to refresh you. We're not going to hold you. We're not going to listen to you. And it's not going to be collaboration with us and you. So the frontline clinician has to protect their client oftentimes from the organization and themselves from both. And so they get sandwiched and crushed and blown out. Right? We need more wholehearted, whole-minded, integrated clinicians in a society that is relationally deprived. In 2007, when we opened the iPhone box, we had no idea what Pandora was going to be. And so from 2007 on, the incidence of anxiety, depression, suicide have gone up by a power of 10, especially with certain populations. It has not brought us together. So we're more relationally deprived. The nuclear family has been dismantled. You have 2, 3, 4 income homes now. So we barely know each other in our house, and we barely know ourselves. Once every 10 years, we bump into ourselves, as Derek Walcott in his poem, Love After Love, you bump into yourself every 10 years to try to engage yourself. So in that environment, we need frontline clinicians to be the best position possible. If all our profession says relationships drive outcomes, are we creating the relationship with the clinician, the front office person, so that when that client comes in, their neuroreception says, this place is safe because these people actually want to be here. I saw that psychiatrist say hello to the front desk person, and that felt authentic. And of course, they're not thinking this, they're feeling this. They're knowing this. Why would you bring your child who's self-harming to an institution that you get from the go, the receptionist doesn't want to be here? So I think that goes like misunderstood or not honored. And I appreciate it. I run a business. I appreciate it. No managed care company is paying me to supervise people. Medicaid doesn't pay you to provide good care for your front desk staff. So, but again, even there, I don't want to go too far off, but it just makes sense. It's logical, to care for your staff in a way that models how you want them to care for the people you care about. And so we spend a lot of time here, a lot of development, supervision, team building, self-care practices for our staff. All our mind-body stuff our staff can drop into. We do staff sound bathing. We do staff iris yoga nidra. How do we help them really feel held so they can hold? Right? This commodity we're making our profession out to be is dangerous. It's not a commodity. Right? It really is. It's a relationship. And so it's counterintuitive to pause and say, perhaps we can enter into a relationship, Tim, that might bring you someplace with yourself. And let's take time doing that. Like that's not, Amazon can't drop that off to your house by a drone later on today.
Right.
That trauma-informed approach does not work just looking at the client. It's got to look at the staff too. And make sure we're whole people trying to help whole people. Does that make sense?
Very much so. Very powerful. It is, it seems to me, quite the challenge the more clinicians you have. And you have a lot of clinicians, so my hat's off to you if you're actually able to continue at least even to focus on creating that.
Yeah. So we do consultation groups. So we have a consultation group on IFS, on polyvagal, on DBT that our staff get paid to go. It's volunteer basis, so that they get an investment in their professional and personal development. And then we have all these self-care activities we do. So we're yoga people, right? So come meditate with Larry, every third Thursday at 2. Come do trauma-informed yoga with Ryan. every Tuesday morning at 9. So sound bathing, yoga, meditation. So we are trying to create that type of environment. And, 16 years ago, we started off with 4 staff, and today we have 119. Like I said, to start this conversation, it's very humbling that all these people would come and want to share this mission. And I think really honoring everyone is it's also really important. That equanimity, that real practice of that. The psychiatrist is not more important than the intern. The intern is not less important than the access person, right? This job is hard. Going into trauma work is hard. Let's not make it harder on each other. Can we have fun and support each other? This is hard work. So just paying more attention to that, I think, is really important. And no payer does that, like I said. So it's really up to the organizations to understand the logic. I love that. John Kabat-Zinn talks about mindfulness being mind training, that all these practices are not just spiritual and feel-good practices. They're just logic. It just makes sense.
Well, and when they work and they're practical, then that's the only thing that allows you to continue to do it.
Yes,
otherwise you're spending all that time and money at it, and it's not working, then it doesn't last.
Yeah, there's this whole other side of the conversation about how do you keep a practice model going in a very hostile economic and market force kind of context. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
Do you teach that? Or there people can come pay you to learn that? Because that's
Yeah, we do. I do some business consulting. I've been asked to talk to people. Please learn from my mistakes. Please learn from my suffering. When Bessel van der Kolk first did his book launch, Body Keeps a Score, he went to Kapalu up in the Berkshires, Massachusetts, to do a workshop, and I went to see him. A wonderful book, wonderful brain, wonderful person. And I was having lunch with him. He's very accessible. And so I was sitting down with him. And I said, so what is your practice model in Boston? Like, how do you guys do what you do? This integrated thing. What do you do? And he looked at me and says, well, what do you guys do in Jersey? I said, this is what we do. We have these multiple disciplines that somehow, through relationship and respect, have chosen to work together. It's not always easy to get a psychiatrist to sit in the same room with a yoga person.
Absolutely.
But we were able to do that. And we customize case by case. We share cases. So a client comes and see a doctor, maybe think about antidepressant. She refers to our therapy. Now we're working with a doctor. We suggest, maybe ecotherapy would be helpful too. And so now we have this care plan that we've created with this client that includes all these different disciplines under one roof, right? And Bessel, like I can say that to him. I said, well, there is no model. No one knows. We're all kind of developing it now. So keep in touch. We keep on trying to figure it out, right? The dual credential is, I guess, the last thing I want to say is that I do believe the next evolution of our profession is people having a clinical credential, LPC, PhD, LCSW, and a mind-body credential. I think that back in the day, having an LCADC and a LCSW was more marketable, right? I think the new evolution is an RYT, a CIAYT, and a LCSW, so that you can, in the same hour, taking the same copay, work in the same mind body, right? If people try to get yoga individually, it's $175 an hour because insurance doesn't cover it.
Right.
Me being LCSW and trained in IRES Yoga Nidra, I can employ that as my clinical practice. It removes the cost barrier so people can actually learn this stuff that may save their lives in that respect.
Right.
So right now, my beloved wife, Judy, Catherine, passed from breast cancer when I was 38. My son was 8. And so Catherine helped launch Integrated Care Concepts, and love came knocking a few years later. And my beloved Judy brought yoga into the practice. And our lifelong dream had been to develop a yoga teacher training series for clinicians. And so I'm very happy to say that we have launched that. Judy completed her master's in yoga science from Maryland, and now has started 3 cohorts of clinicians learning to use trauma-informed yoga to get their 200-hour RYT cert. to build on that. And of course, all those ideas came from our exposure to Amy Weintraub and Richard Miller and all those wonderful elders. That it's not that we have new ideas, my friend, it's that we just brought them together maybe in a unique way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, as we mentioned, as we were talking to set this up, we could probably do 2 or 3 hours like this. So I greatly appreciate your time and your willingness to share. And I look forward to trying to hook you into another interview before too long.
Well, my friend, you've made this really, really easy. And thank you. I appreciate the honor of chatting with you.
Blessings. Larry Thompson is a social worker who was trained at New York University. He earned a master's degree in social work. His theoretical orientation is in the use of self and Zen psychology and psychodynamic object relations theories. He was formerly the director of Children's Mobile Response in Ocean County and team leader for Monmouth County's PACT team. Larry holds postgraduate certificates in child and adolescent mental health and parent education from Rutgers University. Larry incorporates his training in dialectical behavioral therapy and cognitive analytic therapy with nature and holistic approaches in work with adolescents, individuals, and families. Larry's passion for integrating a total wellness approach continues to carry over into his professional and personal life. He has completed a postgraduate certificate through Drexel in complementary and integrative therapies, so as to offer his clients additional options for their wellness recovery, as well as iRest yoga, nidra meditation through the Integrative Restoration Institute.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.